All right, g'day, g'day. Welcome back to Collectivitis podcast, where we dissect the disease that is collectivism. My name's Pietro. This is Max. How you doing, Max?
Pretty good, Pietro. How's things?
Things are good. Things are finally getting interesting when it comes to the US election, which is looming later on in the year. I mean, I say finally interesting. They've been interesting the whole way, and we're still kind of waiting for the other foot to drop, if it is going to drop at all. So we've got plenty of to talk about there. Personally, I'm good. It's going to be quite hot today. How are you, Max?
Yeah, can't complain. Can't complain. Lots happening in the political world, abroad and closer to home.
Yeah.
So a little bit to chat about. Hey,
And clearly, those tires I've been burning in my backyard to get this global warming thing happening a bit quicker have finally been working because we've had
finally.
a late resurgence of summer this year and some nice weather finally. So
I
we're
feel like
probably
it
gonna keep burning those tires.
happens every year for as long as I've been alive, that like summer has carried on into autumn. It normally gets hotter towards the end of summer, start of autumn.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I feel like the last few summers have been shit, but I
Last few
look
summers have
up.
been like cold as fuck in December. Like last
Yeah.
year we had a 12-degree day or a bunch of 12-degree days, had the heater on
Yeah.
in summer.
Yeah.
Um,
Exactly.
You know what the news
Um,
does, Pietro? I
what?
don't think this is on like the topic of on the list of topics we're going to talk about today, but the fear-mongering news, 20 years ago, if it was the, 35-degree day, the map would just be orange, oh, it's a bit hot today. Now it's like 28 and the map's burning red,
Yeah.
extreme heat, you're all going to die if you step out in the sun today.
Maybe we should add a weather segment to our show, like a proper news prop podcast. We add a weather segment at the start. Well, that's what we're doing. This is the first time we're doing a weather segment. Hey, we're well and truly run out of things to talk about because we are talking about the weather. Um,
Do
anyway,
we just need to hire like a third attractive weather person?
yeah. Whether man or woman that can keep our attention drawn there. No, we do have heaps to talk about. So let's start talking about the things that we are more qualified to talk about rather than meteorology. Um, so anyway, the big thing that's happened recently is in the US. We'll talk about Australian politics in a little bit as well, but in the US they had Super Tuesday, which is the day where a large number of states vote in their primaries for both the Republicans and the Democrats, and is broadly the point in which it becomes clear who the nominee is going to be. Because even if not all the states have voted, they kind of trickle in at the beginning, and some candidates drop off as they realize that they're nowhere near the mark when they actually start looking at the votes and not just the polls. But by the end of Super Tuesday, usually there's a candidate head and shoulders above the rest. And that has very much happened to be the case this time for both the Republicans and the Democrats. And surprisingly, we are still marching towards a Trump versus Biden election, which even as we say that, it's somewhat tentative because on the one hand, there are all the rumors around Biden's inability to govern, unfit mental state, etc., etc., etc. The Democrats are unhappy with the fact that he's not doing particularly well in the polls. His approval ratings are low. They might find some way to hamstring his campaign, as the Democrats often do, as they did with Bernie Sanders the last two times, as they do quite often, as they did with RFK this year. They hamstring the candidates they don't want to win. If they decide that Biden is more a liability than a boon, they may well hamstring him and put someone else up. So Biden's uncertain, Trump's uncertain because again, the three-letter agencies, the Department of Homeland Security, CIA, FBI, are all colluding together with the Democratic Party to this idea of lawfare that we talked about last time, where they're trying to bankrupt him and they're trying to interrupt his campaigning and they're trying to throw him in jail on these trumped up charges, which don't bear much scrutiny. So whether they'll succeed is unclear, and whether Trump will be allowed by the establishment to run it all is unclear. So while we have these two front runners, the whole situation is still very much in the dance. Like we don't actually know what's going to happen. I think we've talked about this before. Every day that it gets closer to the election, and it still is them two, I think it reaffirms the fact that it potentially could go with these two candidates, that they might end up actually being, it might actually end up being Trump versus Biden, round two, this time older and more retarded. Um, and they certainly are older. And I mean, at least Biden is certainly more retarded, but Trump has slowed down a bit as
Sounds
well.
like the
We can't argue
tagline for a
that.
bad movie. Right.
Yeah, instead
Bad
of
Boys
Fast
2,
and
older,
Furious,
yeah.
it's
Older and more retarded.
the slow and stupid, slow and stupid two, Washington D.C.
Uh,
Um, so yeah, look, we'll start with the Republican side. The there is some silver lining in all of this. I mean, as much as we're not uh Trump supporters wholeheartedly, there are things we like about Trump. Trump is the best thing about Trump is that he's not Nikki Haley. So let's have a look at Nikki Haley finally dropping out of the race. And we all know she hung in way too long, even when it was absolutely crystal clear she was not going to win. Let's hear what she has to say at the end of her campaign. You can see that.
sure can.
Candidate Nikki Haley is dropping out of the race. She's speaking right now. Let's listen.
Was grounded in my love for our country. Just last week, my mother, a first-generation immigrant, got to vote for her daughter for president. Only in America. I am filled with the gratitude for the outpouring of support we've received from all across our great country. But the time has now come to suspend my campaign. I said I wanted Americans to have their voices heard. I have done that. I have no regrets. And although I will no longer be a candidate, I will not stop using my voice for the things I believe in. Our national debt will eventually crush our economy. A smaller federal government is not only necessary for our freedom, it is necessary for our survival. The road to socialism is the road to ruin for America. Our Congress is dysfunctional and only getting worse. It is filled with followers, not leaders. Term limits for Washington politicians are needed now more than ever. Our world is on fire because of America's retreat. Standing by our allies in Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan is a moral imperative. But it's also more than that. If we retreat further, there will be more war, not less. As important, while we stand strong for the cause of freedom, we must bind together as Americans. We must turn away from the darkness of hatred and division.
All right, that's enough of that piece of shit. I'll let you at her first.
Says one good thing, which is we need smaller government, and then proceeds to say the dumbest fucking thing anyone's ever said, which is if America retreats, there will be more war.
Yeah, I mean, retreats from where? Like retreating back into America, retreating out of the the hundreds of thousands of kilometers away from America's borders where we're fighting foreign wars. I mean, that's not us or us. That's not America retreating. That's that's not attacking anymore.
Yeah,
Um,
it really is
the
just the biggest warmonger out of any of those candidates, isn't she?
Yeah, well, I mean, that was her whole role, right? Was to
Mm.
stand up there and advocate for the poor military-industrial complex that doesn't have an advocate at the moment. There's no one other than Biden. There's no red Republican candidate advocating for the military-industrial complex. Here, I'll do it. I'll shill for it. And
Mm.
I've seen already on some other podcasts and stuff where they talk about people like, oh well, at least she's gone now. She's walking straight into some other corporate job. She's going to get a
Yeah,
job in either the financial sector or the military sector or something. Just like she did when she worked for the UN, came out and her family was broke, and then all of a sudden went into the military industrial complex, and now is like a multimillionaire.
yeah.
Um,
One of her biggest pitfalls is that she is part of the swamp.
yeah,
And
oh
that and,
yeah,
and
she
and
is.
and that
Yeah,
was reflected in the fact that she won the DC primaries, which
yeah.
is just the swamp.
Yeah, it's like with the voice here, how the only state that where the voice got up was
Yeah,
ACT. The
yeah.
closer you are to the nexus of power, the worse the opinions
Mm,
are because everyone there is a yeah, a
yeah.
swamp piece of shit politician.
If
Um,
anything, Nikki Haley, like she was never going to win the primaries against Trump, but she was building up. I thought she was gaining more support as the weeks went on. I don't feel like it was ever going to be enough to get past Trump. Do you and it's just the timing's peculiar that she has like suspended her campaign now when she just won the DC primaries. Do you think she was just holding out to win like one set of primaries for her ego or for some reason?
She had delegates because some states don't give all the delegates to every to the winner. Some of them give them proportionally to the amount of votes. So she has delegates. It's not like she's coming out 500,000 to zero.
Yeah.
That was never the case. I don't think. I mean, maybe there's something about Washington. I don't think it was that. I think that the reason she was still in it is that she was trying to wait for as long as feasible or as possible to see if Trump's campaign would be railroaded hard enough that he wasn't allowed to run, and then she would
Yeah.
swoop in and be the de facto one that's still there. Look,
Was there some ruling this week or something that Trump can't be taken off the ballot in a bunch of states?
yeah, remember he got taken off the ballot in Colorado, or the Supreme Court in Colorado said that he would be taken off the ballot. The federal Supreme Court, so the big Supreme Court that rules the whole country, declared that unconstitutional, and so that can't happen. And I think they voted on it unanimously. So even the
Wow.
Democrat appointed like hyper lefty judges there that normally who are already at the moment outvoted generally if they do split along those lines because of Trump's appointments when he was president. He was lucky. He had a couple of people die while he was in there. So he got to make a few appointments. And but even the lefty ones declared it unconstitutional. So it was like unanimous, which gives credence to the thought that Trump will be allowed to run. Now that's not the only way that they can hamper him. They could I don't know, throw him in jail, for example. I don't know how else they could, but that method, as a starter, is not going to be the way. Nikki Haley, look, she's achieved largely what she wanted to achieve because now she is the main person as seen as the de facto opposition to Trump. If Trump does get taken out, you've got to think that it's kind of late in the piece for someone new to come along. The rest have all kind of endorsed Trump. She's the only one who's kind of like, hey, I kept running for the longest. My name has been around the longest now. I've got the most support. I had the biggest campaign in the end. DeSantis kind of dropped out earlier to save face. So did Ramaswamy. They all did the normal thing, which is to drop out when you realize you can't win. She stuck it out to the very end to get her name out as much as possible. I think there's a chance that if Trump is taken out, that she may well be the de facto candidate. I hope not, but there is that chance, and maybe they are planning to take Trump out at the last second, so there is no time for the MAGA right to reassemble and rekindle behind someone worthwhile. Yeah. So also, I thought it was so ridiculous at the start of that clip. Yesterday my mother got to vote. My mother, who's an immigrant, got to vote for her daughter only in America. What?
Not quite.
No, it's not. It's in every single country in the world that an immigrant who is a citizen can vote for their daughter or son. In fact,
she's the stereotypical bloody, US-centric person.
Yeah.
Just the world revolves around America and nowhere else.
Yeah.
Except for the fact we're going to send troops here, 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 and here. Nothing else exists.
Yeah, well, only America does that, or mainly America does that. Let's say America is the best at doing that, at sending troops everywhere to warmonger. So anyway, that's Nikki Haley. It looks like Trump. Trump did the whole victory lap and all the rest of it. Trump's campaign is looking as solid as ever, and it is looking to be consolidated to being Trump and Biden. Biden had far less competition in his primaries. There was a guy, I can't remember, but no one even knew that there was anything going, and no one's serious. There wasn't a serious Democratic establishment candidate who was pushed up to say, hey, maybe we should actually have someone other than Biden. Obviously, RFK was a genuine contender, and he was polling really well, and it was increasing. But the Democratic Party changed some of their rules so that he couldn't be on their ballots because that was unacceptable to their establishment, and because obviously they were scared that he might actually do something worthwhile. So he's running as an independent. He's still going, and Yeah, so Biden won his primaries. Now, the more interesting thing with Biden that I wanted to look at is he had his State of the Union address, which is a speech where he basically, talks about the state of the Union, the United States, for an hour or over an hour. Now, the speeches we've seen from Biden recently are interesting, to say the least. The questions around his mental capacity is interesting. There was that report into the documents that he'd illegally stored in his house, and he was questioned, and the report came out like a month ago or so, and the prosecutor in his findings
He was unfit to know if he'd taken him or not.
yeah, described him as a doddering old man who couldn't be prosecuted because he was not mentally fit to be reasonably thought of to be doing these crimes deliberately, which is okay, fine, sure, let's not prosecute him, but then he's going to be president. Like that's insane. So, and immediately after that, Biden came out and did a speech like the next day, or like a press conference the next day, of kind of like a show of force. And I think this is very much a follow-up to that. This is Biden's show of force to show, hey, I'm an option. So let's take a look at how he went.
America is a founding member of NATO, the military alliance of democratic nations, created after World War II to prevent war and keep the peace. And today, we've made NATO stronger than ever. We welcomed Finland to the alliance last year. And just this morning, Sweden officially joined, and their minister is here tonight. Can they stand up? Welcome. Welcome, welcome, welcome. And they know how to fight. Mr. Prime Minister, welcome to NATO, the strongest military alliance the world has ever seen. I say this to Congress, we have to stand up to Putin. Send me a bipartisan national security bill. History is literally watching. History is watching. If the United States walks away, it will put Ukraine at risk. Europe is at risk. The free world will be at risk, emboldening others to do what they wish to do us harm. My message to President Putin, who I've known for a long time, is simple. We will not walk away. We will not bow down. I will not bow down. In a literal sense, history is watching. History is watching. Just like history watched 3 years ago on January 6th, when insurrectionists stormed this very Capitol and placed a dagger to the throat of American democracy.
All right.
Far out.
Very interesting. I'll let you have at him first.
Was that the State of the Union address?
Yes. So this is less than 24 hours ago.
All right. Well, first comment is good to see they learnt from last year's State of the Union address and didn't illuminate it in like these evil red lights.
Yeah.
Like,
was that the State of the Union last year? I can't remember what that was.
I'm pretty certain it was. That was fucked. That was like,
yeah.
Oh, jeez. That was a stitch up.
Yeah. That was like the 1984 Ingsoc coloring, like the evil party from 1984 is what that looked like. Yeah, they have learned from that, I guess.
Yeah. First takeaway is that sort of going off what I was hanging shit on Nikki Haley for was that, talks about war prevention, but again, just standard US, like let's put our foot in every country to prevent war.
The only way to prevent war is to fight this war.
Yeah, dumb. Could see Kamala Harris behind him every time Biden's talking. Like I know she's not the sharpest tool in the shed, but she is like a smidge sharper than Biden. Every time he goes to talk, she's just got this nervous look on her face, and like you can see that like she's like waiting. That's probably like the most coherent he's ever been. But you're waiting for him to like really fuck up, and she's like she's just got this look on her face where she's very uncertain. Um, yeah, a lot of, I don't know. He's very forceful, wasn't he? Like it was, putting my foot down and I'm not giving up. I'm fighting. Really getting them all revved up. What are your thoughts?
Um, a lot, pretty similar to you in many regards. So a few things I found interesting. First of all, it's so funny when it starts with a clip of them applauding something he's just said, and it has one
Mm,
later on. But it's so funny if you look at the start of that clip. Half of the half of them are standing and clapping, applauding, standing ovation, and then the other half of the Republicans who are sitting in silence without clapping. And if when the presidents are reversed, it's exactly the same opposite. It's just like so dumb and
mm.
performative.
Yeah.
Um, the Speaker of the House, the guy behind uh, Biden, is I think Mike Johnson, and he's a Republican, and he's a sort of or semi-decent Republican. And again, him. So Kamala Harris
Mm.
standing ovation for everything, and he stands there and looks kind of like maybe gives a bit of an applause. Same when Donald Trump used to give those State of the Unions, and behind him Nancy Pelosi is tearing up whatever he's talking about.
Oh,
Like it's just so performative and shut the fuck up. So I thought that was pretty funny. Biden himself, I thought that was exceptional. That was the best Biden I've seen in a long time. He
Mm.
was did not stutter a word, and that thing goes for a while. I didn't watch the whole thing consecutive, but I skipped to different parts to see if I could find, just to see how he was looking. He's looking great. Whatever cocktail of drugs they have
Mm.
whipped up for this one is something spectacular. Now,
Because normally you could skim through a video and pick any random point. You will find him stutter and mumble,
yeah,
but that was.
yeah, no, and there's long sentences, there's multi-syllable words
Mm.
in there. He is doing like he did remarkably well, and he maintained that forever now. So whatever cocktail they gave him, I don't know if they've just been trying to perfect the cocktail of drugs over the last
Mm.
4 years, and now they've finally got it, or if they've maybe been not giving him the cocktail of drugs because there must be some downside to this, right? They can't give it to him every day, otherwise he'll have a heart attack and die. So maybe they've been building up
Yeah.
his tolerance over a period of time, and now into the campaign, they may well shoot him with it every day to try and get him over the line. Because I mean, if he dies in office, whoever the VP is gets to be
Yeah.
the president. So the Democrats just need someone to beat Trump. Um, maybe like that speech made me think, you know what? I think it may well be Biden. It may well
Mm.
be Biden after all, who gets to the election. I don't know necessarily wins, but he was looking compared to recent times absolutely spectacular. A perfect mouthpiece for the Democrats, and the Democrats want this kind of mouthpiece, right? They want someone who is not uh, individually, independently smart and capable, but who can appear so and say exactly what it is that they want them to say and
Yeah.
fight exactly the wars that they want them to fight. Um, Throws Putin under the bus, talks about January 6th, just
Oh,
your
of course.
classic Democrat talking points, talking about expanding NATO after Putin's interview with Tucker,
Hmm.
explicitly saying what we all suspected for such a long time that, Russia is not anti-NATO per se. Russia, in fact, tried to join NATO, at which point, when the main reason for why you need a defensive military alliance tries to join your military alliance, the need for that military alliance is over,
Mm.
right? Is complete. There's no justification for it, even from their point of view. But obviously they rejected Russia and then started to allow all the satellite states around Russia in because they're trying to
Yeah.
provoke.
And Sweden and Finland.
Yeah, exactly. And so those two are the most recent ones. And rubbing Putin's nose in it. Hey, look, everyone's
Mm.
joining us.
Yeah.
Again, poking him. Go on, do a nuclear war. Go on, have a go at it.
Yeah.
I think, I mean, lucky that Putin seems to be fairly level-headed when it comes to pushing the atomic button, because fucking America certainly is not, in the way that
Mm.
they're approaching this whole thing so flippantly, in every regard, trying to provoke Putin.
It
So
was a
I
good thing you
thought,
touched on though, was the insurrection um mention, right after he's just talk shit about like, Putin and we're going to stand our ground, ties it straight into January 6th.
yeah, yeah, perfect. Weaving in
Yeah.
all the exact Democratic talking points. There was very interestingly at a point in it, he talks about uh he makes a big stand against imprisoning people for marijuana charges, for possessing or using marijuana, not for selling, but for possessing or using marijuana, which is absolutely diabolically, hypocritically comical, because he in the 80s, as well as Kamala Harris throughout her whole judicial career, imprisoned people and still have people in prison for possession charges of marijuana. And there's no hint of an apology. There's no hint
Yeah.
of anything. When Kamala
And
Harris
his
was
son
asked,
smokes crystal meth. So
yeah, his son smokes crystal meth, obviously, and takes bribes from foreign governments by selling the Biden name. But he'll imprison people for possessing and using marijuana for years, and then he'll come out and say, and I think he tweeted like today as a follow up to the State of the Union, nobody should be in jail for possessing or using marijuana, when he is literally the one who put them in there, and Kamala Harris is the one that gave the sentences for years and years. And when Kamala Harris was asked a few years ago now, I think it was on the campaign trail, whether she had ever smoked marijuana, she laughed it off. She laughed it off as if like, well, I mean, like, obviously everyone's tried it kind of thing. And she's ruined people's entire lives and families' entire lives for that law because it's a law on the books and she made a career out of it. So
yeah.
absolute piece of shit. And I mean, he's got to be pro-drug at this point, given the massive cocktail of drugs that they are undoubtedly giving. I'm sure there's crystal meth in his. Maybe it's Hunter Biden who has sorted out the cocktail of drugs that's gotten.
Is it drugs or is it just a steady supply of ice cream and children's hair to sniff that they're giving him?
I'm sure that's part of the cocktail. But I mean, maybe that. You know what? I'm going to reconsider everything. Maybe Hunter Biden deserves every dollar that he gets from the institutions and the whole system, because he's actually an absolute expert in cocktails of drugs, and he is the reason that Biden can sound anywhere near as coherent. In that case, he's worth every penny. He's worth every penny, and he's a national hero for the Democrats. He's managed to make Biden sound coherent for the first time in years. So hey, you know what? I'm Team Hunter. I might be Team Hunter after all.
Done. No longer libertarians. We're Team Hunter.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but some people, some libertarians, not us necessarily, but some libertarians lean more into that whole libertine angle of, it's more about, the whole drug culture and everything, which is fine. In which case, I mean, without the corruption, I think that's Hunter to a T. Is sex, drugs, and rock and roll, which is kind of like the a dumbed down libertine version of libertarianism. So if it weren't for the corruption with other countries, I'm sure Hunter Biden actually is a libertarian. But there is the corruption with other countries, and there's something to do with underage photos or something with Hunter. I can't remember.
I'm not too sure. Not too sure.
Anyway,
But,
it was drugs and prostitutes on the public purse though, for sure, which pretty unlibertarian.
Yeah. Well, that took a turn.
Yeah. So, anyway, that's any last thoughts before we switch over to the Australian side of things?
Nah, things are shaping up for an interesting, what is it? March to November. So what's that? 7-8 months?
Yeah, half a year.
It's going to be interesting.
Well,
we say it every time, but it's already interesting.
Well, I mean, it's interesting every time something happens, but there's no outcome where whatever happens next is not interesting. If it's those two, it's interesting. Whoever wins, it's interesting.
If Biden stays coherent for the next 6 months, it could be a tight race. Otherwise, I'm pretty confident that as long as Trump is allowed to run, he's got it in the bag. So, but if Biden stays coherent and gives out speeches like that, he's going to rally all those Democratic voters who are like, oh, well, he's dumb and he's old and he doesn't know what he's talking about. Even if you don't agree with what he's saying, if he can act like he knows what he's talking about, that's going to win a lot of those voters back on side. So,
yeah, instead of fast and furious, we've got slow and stupid. So,
older and more retarded.
Older and more retarded.
Can that be the tagline for this episode?
Retired and retarded. Or should be retired, but isn't. Yeah, look, let's move on and talk about Australia for a little bit, because we did have an interesting election happening in Australia. We had the Dunkley by-election just last week, and it was an important election, more so than generally a by-election would be, because it was a bit of a referendum on how Albanese was going. It was like an outer suburbs outer kind of metropolitanish suburbs electorate, which is exactly what the Liberals are aiming to target if they want any chance to win back the having control of the country. And so, and for both of the, and Albanese obviously doesn't want to lose it. He wants a show of force to show that he can hold it. It was a fairly safe Labor seat prior to the member passing away, Peter Murphy. And also we had a Libertarian candidate in there right at the heat of the moment where everything that we've been talking about for God knows how long is happening. So, you know, hopefully someone would listen to the people who have been warning about these things for this entire time. Also on the back of Javier Milei becoming a household name, which just to harken back to Trump for a second, Trump had a video where he hugged Javier Milei and so did Vivek Ramaswamy. So that link there between Trump and Javier Milei is a little bit closer now. Their association is certainly something that they've fostered. So the Libertarian name potentially could do quite well. And for all these reasons, the Dunkley by-election was an interesting one. The outcome was that Labor still won, held on to the seat. They actually increased their percentage of the vote, but decreased their two-party head-to-head. I think Greens lost.
Yeah, I was going to say that was the interesting thing is like the big swing against the Greens, which is sort of like unheard of in modern day politics. You know, the last few elections we've had, whether it be by-elections or, you know, federal, state, it's always a swing to the Greens. Like that's the modern world we're living in. So really interesting to see the swing away from the Greens, and it goes straight to the two major parties, that swing.
Yeah, we could speculate on that a little bit. I don't know whether that's necessarily a swing entirely against the Greens, or if it's kind of some Greens voters thinking, oh shit, we really need Albo to win this one. I'll vote Labor instead of Greens. Now, obviously, that's not how the preferential voting system works. They could have still voted Greens and sent their vote to Albanese. But as we've discussed many times, we discussed it just a couple of weeks ago with Rick Westgarth. Most people don't, or a lot of people don't actually know how the electoral system is meant to work, and they will not use the preferential voting system to their advantage, and they'll send their vote to a major party first, even though they like another party better. So potentially there is some of that. Look, potentially there is a component of in the midst of an inflation crisis, a debt crisis, you know, cost of living is how it's broadly talked about. There's not as much interest in the environment. They can't shove that environmentalist angle down our throats quite as much. People just don't care. When you can't afford groceries, when you can't afford to fill up your car, when you can't afford to purchase anything, and the value of your money is dropping at an incredibly rapid pace, you can't ever think of owning a house. You don't give a fuck about the tree huggers. Is potentially also a part of that swing away. That was so Labor wins. The Liberal candidate, I don't know. You had some thoughts on the Liberal candidate. I don't really know too much about him. Nathan Conroy was his
Nathan
name.
Conroy. What a clown. Like,
Yeah.
literally. I watched I'm not sure if you watched it as well, the pub test with Paul Murray on Sky News. And this guy just, every question he was asked, he broke into this like passionate minute-long like campaign. Instead of answering the question, you know, I'm trying to think of like an example. There would be a question about like, okay, what are you going to do about the cost of living crisis? Just like, you know, broadly speaking. And instead of going like, okay, we've got plans to do this and this, he was, for far too long, I'm not going to do the Irish accent, but for far too long, Labour have been doing this,
For far too long.
But he never answered any questions. And there were only 3 candidates there. Like, you know, as far as the pub test little candidates go, it was pretty like lackluster. But geez, man, he's just a clown. And did you see his concession speech?
No.
So you would think he'd won it, man. You would think he'd won it. The crowd was roaring and like applauding, and he was like super happy. And then believe it or not, if you haven't seen it, middle of the fucking speech, he goes, "Oh, my wife just came over and whispered in my ear, I've got some good news. I'm gonna be a dad." And the crowd's like applauding. He goes, "I don't know when I had time to do it because I've been campaigning, but I'm gonna be a dad." And it's just like, It was just the
Cool.
most. I should have pulled up an audio clip of it. It was the most video clip. It was the most bizarre thing.
Yeah, look, I think that there are a few things to take away from it. I mean, the fact that the Liberal candidate was just a good talking head and made the usual points of, hey, uh, these are my campaign messages. This is my rehearsed speech. I don't need to answer anything specifically. I think makes perfect sense. The Labor candidate was exactly the same. I thought that there was interesting. So we talked about when I had Rick Westgarth on, who was the campaign manager for the Libertarian Party, how minor parties, it's really important for them to hit the 4% mark, because then they get campaign funding and get some money for the war chest to continue campaigning on into the future, which the major parties get automatically. Because they will always hit above 4%, but minor parties don't get given that. So it becomes very hard for minor parties to ever make a mark when major parties are funded so extensively. And that was very much the aim for the Libertarian Party. We had Kristen on as well, who was the candidate for the Libertarian Party. And look, I know Kristen quite well. She's a great campaigner. The Libertarian Party, unfortunately, only hit 2.5%. So generally, when there is an independent, even if they are useless, even if they don't campaign well, they do get a good percentage of the vote, just because lots of people look at independent and think, fuck it, I'll vote for an independent because I hate everyone else. Compulsory voting, people are forced to vote without even knowing anything other than the independent's name. They'll vote for the independent because there's no party attached to them. So there was the disadvantage that there was an independent in this election who ended up getting something quite large. I think he got like maybe 6% or something. Don't quote me on that. That's off the top of my head. But something I thought which was a massive misstep by the Libertarian Party was a missed opportunity, because and I did have some involvement with the campaign, and Kristen was actually very much on board with talking about this, but it just didn't eventuate. But I think, how are we in the midst of a cost of living, we call it cost of living crisis, which is really an inflation crisis created directly by the things that we've warned about as libertarians, and that the Austrian School of Economics has been warning about since its inception, like in prior to the 20th century. How is it that we are not capitalizing on this and talking about things like central banks, things like the origin of inflation, and we stick to the talking points of cost of living and removing fuel excise tax, for example, which, great, yes, that is a libertarian idea, but we end up sounding exactly the same as Liberal and Labor, and especially in a by-election like this one, where the stakes were really low because there was no Senate candidate whose campaign this could derail, because usually there is a Senate candidate which has the best chance of winning for the minor parties, and lower house candidates can only really derail that because they don't have much of a chance of winning. But there was none of that this time. We're on the heels of Javier Milei talking about, taking a chainsaw to central banks in Argentina and talking about how inflation is all the fault of the socialists and the central banks and the government. And yet we focus on this vague message of cost of living. And it just, I think the 2.5% reflects that. I think, I don't know that any other message would have found some more traction, but I mean, what do we have to lose? That's our baseline, I think.
Yeah.
When we just talk about this kind of thing, that's our baseline. And I mean, the Austrian School of Economics, like, they talk about the Austrian business cycle, right? Which is this idea that because there's central banks in control of a country who manipulate the currency, who control the currency, who, using their relationship with the government and take advice from the government and work symbiotically with the government, they choose to keep interest rates artificially low. And they've done this for a great number of years leading up to this recent hike in the last couple of years. They were kept them at almost zero. They were at like 0.1 here in Australia, which is an absurd interest rate to keep it at. Nothing reflecting what the interest rate would be in the market, which is what the interest rate needs to be. It needs to be at market rates. So keeping interest rates artificially low creates malinvestment, creates bad investments, because people are being given the signal by the fact that interest rates are so low that they should be expanding their works, that they should be borrowing, that they should be taking on credit, even if the actual health of the economy is not reflecting this, because the interest rate is falsified. And so what ends up happening is this huge malinvestment, and that's how you get these really big recessions. That's how you, because the recession is the corrective period of all of this bad investment. And what we're getting now is the recession coupled with inflation, because during COVID, the government did an extraordinary amount of quantitative easing, which is where the government borrows money directly from their own bank, the Reserve Bank of Australia, and had to inject it directly into the population to keep everyone at home and happy and satisfied during lockdowns without the fear of going broke. All of which would not have been possible if they didn't have this mechanism of quantitative easing, because they would have needed to raise taxes on people who were working on the essential services in order to keep people at home placated. So all of this lockdowns would not have been possible without this quantitative easing. The recession that we're having now would not be happening without the interest rates being manipulated by the Reserve Bank of Australia. And we would not be having the inflation that we're having without the quantitative easing done by the Reserve Bank of Australia. So all of this coming back to central banks, and we as libertarians, the Austrian School of Economics is what informs libertarianism, is the only right form of economics, the opposite of Keynesianism, which is the economics which the world has largely been following since it has started falling off the edge of a cliff. Austrian economics, the economics which informs libertarianism, is not talked about. And we focus on this kind of pseudo-social issue libertarianism rather than, hey, these answers that we have. And I understand the opposite point of view that, hey, maybe the public this is all too highbrow. Most of the public won't respond to these ideas. But we don't know that. And it's not like someone
we've spoken about it before many times with like Millet and Ruddick, and that is you need to be bold and, you know, just fucking like put your message out there. But like, as you know, I know Millet runs around with a chainsaw in his hand, and a bit ironic, but cut these fucking issues off with the ankle. You don't need to talk about a cost of living allowance if you just say, fuck it, put me in power and I'm gonna, like, you know, shut down 90% of government agencies, and then here's a lot more money in your pockets because you're not paying tax. Like, you just need to sort of like simplify it to some sort of degree in your campaign, rather than talking about these small minute issues like, yeah, sure, fuel excise and everything like that should be abolished, but you know, that's not going to be
these are symptoms.
People paying their rent and not, you know, and yeah, like you say, it's symptoms.
Yeah, I think, yeah, exactly. These are symptoms, not the problem. And there's this prevailing thought that potentially, you know, it might put at risk the fact that we'd hit 4%, but we didn't hit 4%. And I mean, why not try and
4% every time?
And why not try and talk about the actual issue, which is at the core of all of this? All of the social things that we hate about what the government does, the lockdowns, the mandates, the foreign wars. We have genuine and good reasons to hate these on a social level. None of these are possible without the use of central banks to cause, you know, to print money and to increase inflation rather than raise taxes, because that would be unpopular and it would actually awaken the society. So they do taxation by stealth, which is inflation, and none of this would be possible without the Reserve Bank of Australia. So, I mean, I understand we might not be able to abolish it overnight, but we should at least be talking about what the nexus or the catalyst of the problem is. And I think that was a misstep. Look, I think with a good messenger, we could have, you know, Kristen was a good messenger, and Kristen was actually on board to talk about a lot of this stuff. We may have been able to hit something a bit better than 2.5.
Yeah, and at the very least, just
I may be completely wrong.
Take that alternative approach instead of doing the same thing over and over and getting
on
the
back
same
of Millet as well. On the back of Millet doing.
So
anyway,
don't worry, there'll be another by-election soon. Someone will die again or retire. It seems to
someone already died.
It seems to be happening a lot lately.
Yeah, it's always, well, it's the mRNA vaccines. All the Labor members are gonna cark it in the next 3 to 5 years. We're gonna have back-to-back by-elections, and the Liberals. We're gonna win purely by the fact that our elected members are the only ones left alive because they haven't been vaccinated to the eyeballs.
One little side thing I wanted to mention from what you were just talking about, like, you know, the debt from COVID and all the money injected into, I'll say the economy, but barely. The way that's being paid back is land tax on investment properties, and all those land tax bills have finally started to go out and hit people. which is just an absolute joke and like synonymous of everything Labor stands for, which is, you've worked hard, and like for the most part, people with investment properties, they've worked hard, they've taken risks to own them, and they get punished. We're going to punish you for being better off than everybody else, which all that does is kill prosperity, which is, just feeds into the pockets of socialism, which is, we want you all to be dependent on the state, which is, I don't need to tell you, but it is a joke and it's infuriating,
That's great. That's a great point.
And
I'm glad you brought that up. And
people our age in our demographic, like from people I've spoken to, is yeah, why not? They're doing well. They're taking advantage of renters and this and that. Fuck them. They can pay this land tax bill. It's their duty. No, it's not.
Yeah,
and they're just going to pass these costs back on to the renters.
Yes, but that's because we understand, more than just the bare basics of economics, which they don't. But the land tax thing is especially interesting because it's like it's specifically to make up to try and curb the cost of all the COVID debt that they've accrued. And so it's literally, hey, remember that policy that we enacted that you hated? Yeah. You're paying for it now. Yeah. You're paying 3 times your usual land tax, and we're going to tell you here, this is why we're paying this back. Because, hey, remember that thing we had to do that you thought was, an abuse of human rights? You're paying for it now, directly paying for it. And it's because you own a little bit of land. Fuck you. Cop that. Yeah, that's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up. Anyway, fuck the government. I'm all riled up now. We kept it too calm for too long.
No. Fuck the government.
We may as well leave it there. That's a good spot to leave it. If you don't already, follow us on YouTube, Instagram, Spotify, and Twitter or X. Other than that, we will catch you. Like, subscribe, follow, give us a review, all the rest of it. We will catch you at some other point in time.
Shout out to the YouTube commenters who are always calling for me to come back. Tim.
He's here today. Here he is. For the fans. This one's for the fans.
For the fans. Doing it for the fans.
All right. Catch you later.
See ya.